That would be great. So,
Okay.
how do
So,
you guard your heart?
um, well, I mean, it's really the hardest part of the decision-making process was trying to figure out how to do this and still be able to say you're a good husband and a good father. And ultimately, it came down to that, families make sacrifices if it's for the best purposes of the family in the long term. We make short-term sacrifices. We do that all the time. And we made the decision that it wasn't the best interest of our family to have a country that we could be free and practice our faith and be prosperous and have our children be raised in a place where they could, our grandchildren could be similarly advantaged. So that was really the sort of the heart of it came down to. We were willing to step out, make the sacrifice because we thought our country was at a very critical juncture. If I didn't think things were as grave as they are, I don't say that grave in the things that things are horrible and that we're at the end. I think we're at an inflection point that could be a great inflection point to turn this country around in a very positive direction. So I'm actually very optimistic that with the right leadership that the crisis we're going through can be a wellspring through the crucible, right? So we headed on that path, but we knew that it would be long hours away from the family. It would be getting right through the coals by the positions you hold, and a lot of the personal things are always just thrown out there by those who want to inflict evil upon you and try to test you. And it's really through prayer. I mean, I don't know how people who don't have strong faith commitments can do this. I mean, it's like I never understood as having gone through the loss of a child, having gone through some very difficult times in your life. If there's nothing beyond this, then suffering seems to have really very little purpose, really.
Sure.
And so the sacrifice and the suffering that you and your family engage in there, that are put through, it's just part of the cross. It's part of what your journey is, and it's if you're faithful, God will be faithful. And if you're doing what God is calling you to do, then it's certainly not going to be an easy road. He never said it was going to be an easy road. In fact, he said quite the contrary, that it would be a very difficult road.
Sure.
And so we just sort of we take that and we just feel blessed to be able to serve and to sacrifice for a purpose that is greater than ours.
Great. What are your what's at Rick Santorum's core? What are your core values, your convictions, the hills that you'll die on?
I guess the biggest problem I have is I have too many hills that I die on. Because I just really feel like there's, and that it comes across sometimes. People tell me you come across angry, and I said, no, it's maybe intense. And I'm a pretty passionate guy about things that I think are really important. And there are a lot of important things that are hanging in the balance in this country right now. You've heard me talk many times about the basic freedoms we have, government control of our lives, and we're talking about it mostly in the context of economic freedom, but it's more than that. The battle we're engaged in right now on same-sex marriage, ultimately that is the very foundation of our country, the family, what the family structure is going to look like. I'll die on that hill.
Okay.
The basic foundation of our freedom of faith and religion, being able to preach the gospel, to preach the truth about what is ordered and disordered, what is sin and not, what is truth and what is not. Those are important things for our country. That we have people that can preach the word of God. That's something that I'll fall on. The sanctity of human life. I've proven that's something. I talked about freedom and economic freedom, but the ability for our country to have limited government and the federal government's role to be properly properly restrained, I'll fight on that one too. So I'm
What,
saying that
what is limited government? What does that mean?
limited government is, I'm not a conservative in the sense of saying that, well, the government should be the size it was in 1789. Okay. I mean, it's a different world. And,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody back in 1789 would have suggested that it's going to stay, Washington's going to stay a sleepy little swamp town. And so we have a much more complex society, and we're involved. We're a global power. I mean, this is a very different world, but the check should be limited, and that there are things clearly that are done by Washington that don't need to be done in Washington, and to the extent that we can get them out, the world will be better. And whether it's a lot of the social welfare programs that are done in Washington, there may have been a time because of inequities and prejudices at the state level where the federal government had to play a more heavy-handed role to make sure that people were treated equally. I don't think that's true anymore. I don't think that the federal government is any better a body from the standpoint of equity and justice to do this. And so if there isn't an advantage to the federal government, if there isn't a peculiar reason that the federal government needs to step in and do these things, and they're clearly best left, not just to the states, but to the localities and to the families. I wrote in my book, It Takes a Family, that the Catholic principle of subsidiarity, which is things should be handled closest to the individual. And that's first the family, then the church, then the community. And that idea that we only go to the next level of government further removed from the individual and the family, if need be, we need to get back to that. And the idea that most of these things, I mean, I'm a strong believer in national security because that's what the federal government's job is first and foremost. And the rest of the programs that we have, to the extent that we can move them back and make them more community-based and family-centered and at a minimum state-centered, is the better.
Okay. You kind of somewhat opened up my next question. You said during the Bloomberg WASPO debate that the breakdown of the family is one of the biggest problems, or actually one of the biggest causes of poverty. How would you, which I thought was spot on, how would you as president address that?
Well, I wrote a whole book about it called It Takes a Family.
All right.
And so 429 pages of talking about what policies that are oriented toward helping families. Everything from tax policy. For example, let's take Herman Cain's plan, okay, the 999 plan. Be devastating toward families. If you have the 999 plan and you earn $50,000 a year, you're going to pay X percentage in taxes. If you have no kids, if you have 7 kids, you're going to pay the same percentage in taxes. You're going to pay the same tax bill. You're going to take the same out of whether you have 7 kids or you have no kids. Guess what's going to happen? Fewer people are going to have 7 kids. Why? Because it costs more to raise 7 kids than it does to be there on your own. And the federal government's recognized that and says, you know what? Because we want to encourage and support families, we're going to tax families less than, depending on how many children you have, than people who don't have children. Not because we want to punish people who have children, but we don't want to make it impossible. A situation like that, as you know, happened in Europe, and we hit, they can't, they're now paying bonuses for people to have children. Why? Because they've made it so expensive to be able to raise children. Well, the federal government has done, even today under the current tax code, does a terrible job in supporting families. And I used to know this number, and I should probably refresh my memory, but it was something like, if you took the dependent deduction for children back in 1950 and when the tax rate on the American family was 2%, and it was Social Security taxes, and the average family paid no federal income tax. Why? Because the dependent deduction for children was huge. Remember, that was back in the time when, after the war, we wanted kids. So we were really enthusiastic about saying, we want you to have more kids. We went through the Depression. We went through the Great War. We had lost a lot of population. And so people were saying, look, we want to encourage childbirth. Guess what happened? We had a baby boom, right? Okay. And Why? Because we support it. If we had kept that deduction at the same, it'd be multiples. I mean, it'd be, instead of a few $1,000s, it'd be $20,000 per kid. But we don't do that anymore. We say, you know what, we're not gonna protect the family and the family unit. I think that's a mistake. And then that's one. So that's just one tax policy.
Thinking of breakdown family, I work with juvenile offenders that's my day job. Blogging is my day job. So,
Okay.
I see most of the kids that I work with,
fathers.
no fathers.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we impact policy? I mean, can we?
Sure, we can. We can do it in a lot of ways. Number one, I mean, I've worked with a lot of nonprofit organizations, and I put forward a bill called the what's it called, National Fatherhood Initiative or something like that, with Pete Domenici and Evan Bay when we were all there, to try to focus some resources on trying to bring fathers back involved with their children. I use this statistic that at the time of the birth of a child out of wedlock, 80% of the couples are engaged in a relationship with the intent of marrying. 80%. Within a year, only 10% are in that situation. So, what does the government do? What does society do to try to help that situation? The answer: nothing. Do we have a role to play? I would say it's in the best interest of everybody involved. If there's something we can do to be helpful. Now, the question is what? And I'm open to discussion as to what, but clearly providing some sort of supportive services for that. Again, not necessarily at the federal level, but encouraging that. And here's where I think the power of the presidency is overlooked by conservatives, and that is, look over the last few weeks. We've had a discussion in this country on class warfare, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because that's what the president's talking about. The president has a huge ability to start a national debate and continue a national debate. Rick Santorum will start a national debate and will continue a national debate about the importance of family, marriage, fatherhood. All of those things are going to be front and center issues with me, and they're not going to be, National Fatherhood Week. We're going to have a discussion about and trying to bring all of the sectors of our society together: the church, education, the business community, government. And I used in my book an example out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not. It's a group called First Things First.
I've heard of them.
And First Things First was, and I actually had them come and testify before the Senate when I was working on this issue. First Things First was a project put together by all the groups I talked to you about before to address an issue that shocked them. They found out they had one of the highest divorce rates in the state, Chattanooga, and one of the highest out of wedlock birth rates in the state. And they had very little father and paternity establishment. So what they did is brought all of these sectors together, not a single dollar of public money, but they had a team concept that what can we do to change that dynamic. They put together an advertising campaign with private sector dollars. They put together programs in the schools. They put together programs at the church, government-sponsored types of events, all centered around fathers taking responsibility for their children, the community promoting marriage, talking about marriage as a public good, talking about the economic as well as social benefits of marriage, educating people in the schools, introducing in the curriculum. How many schools talk about marriage? How many schools talk about the importance of marriage in so many communities, particularly in the poor areas? It's a bridge too far. It's something that they wouldn't even consider because they don't know anybody that's married. They don't know. There are children growing up. It's one thing if you're growing up and you don't have a dad in the home. It's another thing if you're growing up in the neighborhood where nobody has a dad in the home. It's I can tell you when I was growing up and the kids, we had some single parent homes, but all the other dads sort of pitched in and helped, and it was sort of compensated for that. But if there are no dads, there's nobody to compensate, and so it's something that the president doesn't just propose legislation. He can lead this country in ways that I think are maybe even more important than the legislative remedies. services.
Would you continue on with the office of, I can't even think what it's called now.
Faith-based initiative?
Yeah, it's faith-based initiatives. President Obama calls it something different.
Oh, yeah.
Community neighborhood outreach, whatever.
Yeah. We would. I was someone who was a great supporter of the idea of having faith-based community initiatives be a very important part of delivering social services. And I think we're going to see under our administration, you would see a lot of those social service programs pushed back to the states. And so, whether the role for that at the federal level was one would be as prominent as it was before, I would be the head of the faith-based community initiatives, because that's something I would be talking about and be focused on a lot as president.
Let's see. We've talked about this before, but there's been a lot of talk about, I'm pro-life on this and that. I know you've led on that issue. So certainly you definitely got good street cred on pro-life issues. I'm just wondering, what can we do to advance the pro-life agenda beyond what we've already done?
Again, this is another area that the president can lead on by talking about it, being comfortable in his skin and dealing with these issues. So part of it is what you highlight, what you talk about, where you go, what programs that you bring the attention of the American public. Again, sort of starting that public debate about the sanctity of life. Being in office with 7 children, and our youngest child, who's 3 years old, is a special needs little girl who is a miracle to be alive. And just having Bella's story told, and letting people see what a great blessing she is to our family and hopefully to the country, to see this little angel who can't really do anything for me except love me. And she does, and that's everything, because it is, in a sense, everything. If you think about it, I always say that Bella gave me insights of how the Father looks at me as disabled, unable to do anything for him of any value to him except love him. And that's what she does for me. I always say these children have so much to teach us of what's really important. And so, can we pass bills? Yeah, I'll work on trying to pass bills. I'll work on trying to make the laws of this country more friendly life. I'll repeal all funding of abortion. We'll repeal Obamacare and get rid of any kind of idea that you have to have abortion coverage or contraceptive coverage. And one of the things I will talk about that no president has talked about before is I think the dangers of contraception in this country. The whole sexual libertine idea. And many in the Christian faith have said, well, that's okay. I mean, contraception's okay. It's not okay, because it's a license to do things in the sexual realm that is counter to how things are supposed to be. They're supposed to be within marriage. They're supposed to be for purposes that are, yes, conjugal, but also immunitive, but also procreative. And that's the perfect way that a sexual union should happen. And when we take any part of that out, we diminish the end. And if you can take one part out, that it's not for the purposes of procreation, that's not one of the reasons, then you diminish this very special bond between men and women. So why can't you take other parts of it out? And all of a sudden it becomes deconstructed to the point where it's simply pleasure. And that's certainly a part of it. And it's an important part of it, don't get me wrong. But there's a lot of things we do for pleasure. And this is special, and it needs to be seen as special. And again, I know most presidents don't talk about those things, and maybe people don't want us to talk about those things. But I think it's important that you are who you are. I'm not running for preacher. I'm not running for pastor. But these are important public policy issues. These have profound impact on the health of our society. And I'm not talking about moral health, although clearly moral health, but I'm talking economic health. I'm talking about out-of-wedlock birth rates, sexually transmitted diseases, all of these other things. These are profound issues that we only like to talk about it from a scientific point of view. Well, that's one point of view.
Yeah.
But we also need to have the courage to talk about the moral aspects of it, and sort of the purpose, the reason, the rationale for why we do what we do.
I think you kind of touched on my next question. What would President Santorum cut? Hey, think of your top 3 things.
Well, firstly, Obamacare would be the first thing that would go. Secondly, we would take the means tested entitlement programs, Medicaid, food stamps, housing, education, training programs, and we'd do what we did to welfare reform. We'd block grant the programs, send them back to the states, let them operate them under a lot less federal scrutiny than currently exists. Take discretionary programs. My current thinking is to take them back to 2008 levels prior to the Obama surge in spending, so we have a reduction in discretionary spending. I'm not too sure. It sort of depends where the economy is and things are right away as to how much you would do right away or how much you would phase down. But we would certainly see a reduction in discretionary spending. And then, of course, you take on the other 2 big programs, which are Social Security and Medicare. And I've been supportive of the Ryan Plan on Medicare, and believe that we need to have some gradual changes to Social Security that will phase in over time to make sure that the revenues, which I will not increase, will match expenditures. And other countries have developed formulas to change everything from something called bend points to consumer price index calculations to retirement age calculations those are the 3 basic things. There's some other minor adjustments can be made, but those are the 3 things that need to be changed over time to make sure that revenues and expenditures meet, so we have a program that's solvent.
Okay. Kind of related to this, I've talked with you. You know, education is one of my hot topics, and you understand. You've talked about block granting, specifically Race to the Top. Race to the Top brought in education funds from the stimulus package, where the Department of Education, without the consent of Congress, basically entice states to adopt Common Core state standards in order to become eligible for these grants.
Yeah, I oppose Race to the Top. I oppose the federal government intervening in the provision of education. I always ask when I'm in a town hall meeting, I don't always ask, but I've been asking more recently, how many of you parents are only concerned in school about your child's academic achievement? Raise your hand. Nobody ever raises their hand. Of course they're concerned about more than that. They're concerned about their growth in virtue and character. They're concerned about their physical growth and health. They're concerned about a lot more than their children than just, and of course, their spiritual. So why do we have a education system where it is increasingly the dominant part of a child's life? It's the biggest chunk of time out of a kid's day by far. Why do we have that limited to only one thing that somebody in Washington, D.C. thinks your child should learn? Or should we have an education system that is focused on what the parents want their children to learn? Okay, a system that is focused on the customer of the education system, which is the parent. The parent's the customer of the education system. Why? Because it's the parent's responsibility to educate their children. And therefore the government's role should be to help the parent provide what is best for the child.
So how would that happen at the federal level, or should it even happen?
It shouldn't happen at the federal level. The federal should get out of the way. And it goes back to, again, what's the President of the United States' role is? Well, you have certain things that the federal government's supposed to do, and you better do them well. Okay, you defend this country, you have a criminal justice system that makes sense, you have anti-terror programs here in this country, for example, you have border control, you have some basic federal programs that help make sure that the economy runs as smoothly as possible in interstate commerce. And then you have a president who understands that a lot of the social welfare programs need to go back to the states. Education needs to get back to the states and further down into the local level. And you talk about it, and you hold all sorts of forums, and you try to create an atmosphere where the real reform in the education system, not rearranging the decks on the Titanic, but a real reform of the education system that has parents at the center, children as the object, or I guess using my sentence structure, the indirect object, and that maybe the school district is the direct object. I don't know. One of those. I'm trying to figure out how that all works, but the point is, the schools and parents should work together for the purposes of making sure that the child is in the best possible environment to meet all of their needs that the parents are concerned about. That and that if the parents are concerned about here, I believe my child needs more spiritual growth, more moral formation. Then there should be options available that the school district says, you know what, if that's what the parent wants for their child, then that they've paid their money into the till, and allow them the opportunity to be able to use that money for the purposes of what best suits them and their children. Not to say we'll pay for everything, but
Sure.
we can help and support their activities.
Okay, so President Santorum, you come into the Oval Office. Are you going to initially, I guess, repeal race to top, or because this is all done via executive order?
Yeah, we'll have a long laundry list of executive orders that will be repealed.
And give waivers to the states.
And that will be one. Look, we're going to repeal all sorts of regulations that require the federal government, that inject the federal government into the area of education. I just think it's wrong-headed. And I muse with the idea, not on primary and secondary, but on higher education, that will tie higher education dollars to the new. I don't know what we'll call it. Well, let me see. We'll call it. It's not Title IX. Nine's an overused number these days. My favorite number is 7. Maybe we'll call it Title 7, which is, or maybe we should make it an even number. Title 2, and saying that there should be an equal number of conservative professors teaching our kids in colleges and universities who receive federal funds as liberal, and that we have organizations that are certifying organizations, just like we have certifying organizations that accredit a college. We're going to have certain organizations that will accredit conservative professors. That if you are to be eligible for federal funds, you have to provide an equal number of conservative professors as our liberal professors. So we have some balance when our children come to school and are not in the process of being indoctrinated by the academy, which is exactly what they are right now. And if we do not fight this battle of government control of education in primary and secondary, and the left's control of education post-secondary, then we are not going to have a country that's going to be free, because we have a country that will be built and educated on a model of socialism, on a model of that approves and condones and encourages government control of your life.
Monetary policy, the value of the dollar is in the tank. How would you address that?
I believe in the Fed. I believe the Fed is really for a country at this point in our development. Going back to a gold standard, I think it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, you have a commodity which we don't produce much of in this country, that we would tie our dollar to, that is subject to fluctuations based on mining that goes on in South Africa. Not exactly something I want to tie my economy to. The gold standard was popular for a lot of years because the expectation was as the economy would grow, then production of gold would grow. Well, there's no correlation between the two anymore, and so gold is a very scarce commodity, and so tying it to that, I think, is a folly. And secondly, the other folly is the dual charter of the Fed. When Humphrey Hawkins passed, and included in it the ability for the Fed to be able to change monetary policy based upon trying to increase employment in this country, it created a conflict with the Fed that has raised serious doubt and suspicion among those who are sound money folks that the Fed is acting not in necessarily the best interest of the dollar, but in the best interest of potentially even political motivations to strengthen the economy for job growth based on an election. So what I believe we should do is repeal the second charter and have the Fed go back to a monetary policy that is focused on sound money. And I would say that if there was not a second charter right now,
But how do you get sound money if it's not based on something tangible like gold?
well, but why base it on something that is a commodity that is probably going to be increasingly scarce,
Okay.
and we have no control over? I mean,
Okay, so
that does concern me. That South Africa decides, well, we're going to hold out and not produce any gold for a while.
Okay.
What's going to happen to our currency? I want something that we control the currency.
okay, so what would that be?
And well, you have a Federal Reserve that is more transparent. Obviously, we've talked about transparency during the debates, and I believe in that transparency. But whose sole charter is sound money instead of increasing employment or decreasing unemployment. If we had a charter right now, if the Fed was a single charter organization whose only objective was to make sure that we had low inflation and no deflation, and they acted exactly the way they were acting now, okay, you would, at least I would say, well, they probably are acting based upon the fact that they think we're in a potentially deflationary environment. There's an argument that can be made that that's the case, and the best minds have come together and thought, you know what, we might be wrong, but at least we're doing it for the right reason. Now, again, they might not be right, they might be wrong, but as long as the people have confidence that they're doing it for the right reason, in this case, a lot of folks think, and I think legitimately so, they're doing it to try to hold down the rates of unemployment. And they're sacrificing sound money as a result. Well, if they only have one charter, then they have no reason to sacrifice sound money, and I think that's the way we should be.
President Obama just committed up to 100 troops to Uganda and surrounding regions to assist with the suppression, I can't remember the exact terminology they used, of the Lord's Resistance Army.
Right.
Agree, disagree, why not?
I've only followed a little bit of this,
Okay.
and I do know of the conflict in Uganda. My concern is the president, and I know he's saying he's based on an authority in a statute that was passed by Congress recently. Well, not recently, I guess last session of Congress. But nowhere in that statute, reading a couple articles, that it authorized military force. And now I know the president say these are advisors. I would suggest that we send advisors that are not military advisors. They may be advisors that have military training, but not men and women in uniform. I think that's a mistake unless the president can outline what the national security objective is. I understand there's great humanitarian concern about what could happen in Uganda, and certainly we don't want that to happen. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't be deploying personnel there, whether State Department or others who might help in a security in some security way. But when you deploy the American military, you deploy it for one reason, and that's for the national security of our country. And I think what the president has done here is not lay out a case that's compelling that there is a national security interest for us to be in Uganda. There may be a humanitarian one, and that's perfectly legitimate to send aid, to send personnel that might be helpful in making sure that there isn't a humanitarian disaster or eugenics or whatever the case may be, or not eugenics, genocide. And that's fine, but you need to make the case as to why it's national security if you're going to send the military.
Okay. And there's a follow-up question. In what circumstances would you deploy troops? Not necessarily Uganda, but I mean anywhere.
I think I just laid it out.
Okay.
When I believe the national security of our country is at stake, and not until then.
Okay. Would you get Congress's consent?
It would all depend on the circumstances. I'm not a, when I was in the Congress, I was a lukewarm advocate of the War Powers Act. I read the Constitution, and the Constitution gives the president fairly broad powers when it comes to national security. And clearly, if there was an emergency situation or a situation where we needed to act quickly, I would not feel compelled to ask the Congress if the national security of the country was at stake. If it's an engagement of any kind of serious nature, then clearly I would go to the Congress. As I said during the time of the Gulf War and at the time of the Iraq War, the president should go to Congress because it's really tantamount of going to the people. And if we're going to engage in any kind of serious military conflict, then the public must be behind us, and the president has an obligation to make his case to the American public. And in the case of, let's take Uganda. If Uganda was a situation where it was clear that a national security interest was held by the country, that we needed to go to Congress to get 100 people deployed there? No, probably not. But he still needs to go to the people. He still needs to go to the Congress, and he needs to tell them what he's doing and why he's doing it, and make the case. And to the extent that we have a major conflict, certainly getting some sort of action from Congress would be something I would do.
Okay. Let's see, border security. Perry recently said in New Hampshire that he would send, because of the drug cartel and the war that's going on down in civil war going down in Mexico, he would send troops, into Mexico to battle a cartel if necessary. Good or bad idea? What would you do to help secure our border?
I would hesitate to send troops into Mexico unless we had extensive cooperation from the Mexican government. I don't think it's something you don't cowboy it down there. Mexico's an ally. We share thousands of miles of border with them, and we have an obligation to work collaboratively with them on a problem that's affecting both of our countries. So I wouldn't make a blanket statement that I would send our troops down there. I would only send our troops down there if, again, it was clear there was a national security interest, and in this case, because it is a neighbor, we'd have to have some sort of cooperative understanding.
There's a lot of people who've been floating around the idea of putting National Guard down on the border.
It's one thing to put them on the border. It's another thing to to go into another country.
But would you deploy troops to secure the border?
Yeah, no. Again, I put forward a bill, and it's one of the good things about having a record. There's a lot of bad things about having a record. One of the good things about having a record is I have a bill that I introduced way back in 2006 that was a comprehensive border security bill that I think most folks who would look at that bill would be pretty satisfied. Does it call for building of every inch of ground of a fence? No, I don't think anybody believes you can fence everything. There's certainly areas that are not, because of terrain, rivers, because of private lands that go across the border, that a fence is not a practical thing everywhere, but it is in most places, and we need to expand that presence.
Okay. Last question. The Santorum jobs plan. I want to make sure we get this in, because that is probably one of the driving issues of this campaign.
Yeah.
How would you foster job creation?
Well, I euphemistically call it my 0-0-0 plan, which is in contrast to Herman Cain's plan, which I believe will be a sizable tax increase for most Americans, and a crushing one to families and seniors and those who are moderate income Americans. But what our plan is to try to take on the issue that I think is one of the hot button issues, rightfully so in America. I grew up in a little seal town in western Pennsylvania, and if I heard once, I heard it 1,000 times. I'm tired of having our jobs go overseas. We need to have things that are made in America. I want to buy things that are made here in America. And of course, we've seen our manufacturing employment go from 21% of the workforce down to 9%, and we've seen a lot of those jobs go overseas. And a lot of politicians have said they're not coming back. Well, why not? The idea that the only way we can compete with China is a trade war with China. I don't mind going to war with China, but let's go into a competition war. Let's compete for those jobs. Let's get. Certainly, we're not going to get all of those jobs back. Obviously, China is a big country, and they're producing for their own domestic markets, but we can get jobs for at least the production of things that are going to be sold in this country, as well as hopefully having some export capability, if we can make it profitable for businesses, manufacturers to make things here. So the 0-0-0 plan is 0% corporate tax on all manufacturers and processors. So you make no taxes. All that money can be plowed back into plant and equipment, and to worker salaries, and to product improvement. Second, we take the $1.2 trillion that's sitting in foreign banks, repatriate that money back. Most of that money is being held by manufacturers who made things overseas, and if they brought that money back from the profits they made in these foreign countries, they would have to pay an excise tax of up to 35%. Well, if you bring it back for the purposes of investing in plant and equipment, no tax on that. So that's the second zero. The third zero is one of the, maybe the biggest problem, is the regulatory environment that is just choking off the business community in this country. And so we would repeal every Obama-era regulation that cost the business community over $100 million a year. And I would go back and look at other regulations that are detrimental to us being able to be successful from a manufacturing point of view, and repeal that. So we may have to replace some of them, but the act of saying to the business community, we are no longer going to be on your back, we're going to be at your side, and we're going to work with businesses so we can have people working here and making, and this is the final point, the reason I like this plan is because it deals with an issue that the Occupy Wall Street folks have focused on, and I think rightfully, which is income mobility in this country, being able to rise in society. I've been quoting a study that I saw from actually a couple years ago. It talked about how income mobility in Western Europe is now higher than it is in America. And that is not a good thing. I don't care, you know, I hear all these people say, oh, we should, you know, rising tide lifts all boats. When income mobility is down in this country below Western Europe, that is not a good thing, and that we need to start thinking about, from a public policy perspective, how we can take the workers at the bottom 2 or 3 quintiles and give them the opportunity through enhancement of their own skills and capabilities so they can rise into the middle of America. Creating manufacturing jobs does that, and that's one of the reasons that I proposed this bill. And the final reason I put forward this bill is because it can pass. I spoke to the New Hampshire legislature the other day and talked about my manufacturing bill. 0% corporate tax, 0% repatriation, and zeroing out all of the Obama-era regulations. And I talked about energy policy, that we needed an energy policy that was supply, you know, to grow the supply and keep electric prices down, which is, and gas prices down, which is important for manufacturers. And after I finished my talk, and I'm talking, I said, you know, and the key to this is we can get bipartisan support for this. You can get senators and congressmen from Indiana, Pennsylvania, New York. All of these states that are heavy manufacturers will support this because it knows it puts their people back to work in good paying jobs. The chairman of my, co-chairman of my committee happens to be a state house member, and he said a couple of guys came over to him afterwards and said, we like the senator's plan, Democrats. He said, we'd like him to come up to our district and talk about this in my manufacturing sector because we believe that he's got the right ideas. So I just share that with you, that it's not just bold ideas, not just quote good ideas, it's ideas that can pass and that can really have a difference in people's lives and getting people back to work, made here in America, and having a better chance to rise in the income scale.
Great. Yeah, I just want to also, just on the record, formally congratulate Penn State for beating Iowa State. That was
Iowa.
Two out of
Iowa
10
State.
years.
Yeah.
You know.
I was going to say, you won 8 out of the last 9 games. I saw Kirk Ferentz at a party over the summer, and I said, you know, this might be Joe's last year, Kirk. I mean, can you take it easy on the old guy in his last go-around? I mean,
Oh, we did.
You guys just beat the tar out of us. And, you know, I told Kirk, I said, the worst football game I ever attended. College, pro, high school, the worst football game I went to was the Penn State-Iowa game many years ago, where Iowa beat us at Penn State 6-4.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, I remember that.
It was an awful game.
Yeah,
And,
unless you're a real defense fan.
well,
then
but
that was-
even, you know, it's one thing to be defense, but it's just when when the offenses are just pathetic. It's not that your defense, I mean, they were good,
Yeah.
but the offense was just so bad. And, you know, I'm, as you know, I was on the road, and so I was trying to keep up with it by a computer or listening to it on the radio as I was traveling. And I turned it on. It was, you know, 6-3 or something like that. Here we go again.
Yeah.
Another classic. I said, I said, in a Penn State Iowa game, take the under. Not that I bet, but take the under. I'm just a little word of advice to you. Next Penn State Iowa game, take the under. All right.
Thanks.
Thanks.